Okay, so today we're going deep on something pretty crucial, and it's the whole ocean acidification thing, and what it means for coral reefs.
Yeah, those fragile ecosystems.
Right, we've got all these studies and experiments and reports, so what we want to do is really sort through them and figure out, what are they actually telling us about the future of coral reefs?
Right,
Are they going to be around much longer? What's the prognosis?
right.
So one of the big things that jumped out at me when I was going through all this stuff was just how much crucial research is being done in this one really unique spot, One Tree Island,
One tree
right on the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly the picture-perfect tropical island you might think of.
Oh, no.
No white sand beaches or swaying palm trees.
No, not really.
Instead, you've got this kind of strange, almost otherworldly landscape formed completely from chunks of old coral.
Really?
I mean, everything from like tiny little fragments to these huge, massive boulders. It's like centuries of storms just piled it all up there. And right in the middle of all this rubble is a research station run by the University of Sydney.
Right.
And, you really get a sense of this harsh environment when you read about a loggerhead turtle, struggling to find a spot to lay her eggs
Oh, wow.
on that, coral rubble beach. I mean, it just kind of brings it home.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting how this island built from the remnants of past reefs is now this kind of living laboratory helping us understand the changes happening to reefs today.
Right.
I mean, it's like this, cycle of destruction and rebirth in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
And the research station itself has some pretty striking, kind of graffiti, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Things written on the walls like dropping acid on corals,
Uh-huh.
or even creepier, DK13, no one can hear you scream.
Yeah,
It kind of sets the tone,
it does.
hints at what they're investigating and how isolated this place really is.
It's pretty amazing, though, to think about how far we've come in understanding these complex ecosystems.
Totally.
It wasn't always so clear.
No, I mean, if you go back to Captain James Cook, the first European explorer to really encounter the Great Barrier Reef,
Uh-huh.
he was totally baffled by it.
Really?
I mean, he called it this, wall of coral rock, and he knew it was built by animals, but he just couldn't grasp how something so huge could be created by these tiny creatures.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And that's kind of the core of the threat we're talking about now, right? Ocean acidification.
Right.
It's affecting those tiny creatures that build the whole structure.
Exactly. And even after Cook, figuring out how those reefs formed was a puzzle that scientists grappled with for a long time.
Yeah.
You had Lyell coming up with some ideas, but it was really Darwin's theory of reef formation that moved things forward.
Right.
His idea was that reefs grow upwards as the volcanic islands they form around gradually sink, what's called subsidence.
Uh-huh.
Interestingly, his theory wasn't fully confirmed until the 1950s
Really?
through core samples taken in the Marshall Islands
Oh, wow.
during preparations for H-bomb tests of all things.
Wow. Talk about irony.
Yeah, right.
So it took nuclear testing to finally validate Darwin's theory.
It did.
And I think that kind of highlights this point that reefs are, even though they seem so permanent and solid, they're actually pretty sensitive to changes over time.
They are definitely.
Okay, so we've got these reefs, right? These massive natural barriers that can even wreck ships.
Yeah.
And they're built by these teeny tiny creatures, coral polyps.
Yeah.
It's incredible when you think about it.
It is.
And these polyps are this amazing mix of animal, plant, and mineral.
Yeah.
I mean, most of what we see is the dead calcium carbonate skeleton,
Right.
but the surface is teeming with life.
Right.
And they've mastered this incredible process called calcification,
Uh-huh.
which is how they build their hard skeletons, but they don't do it alone. It's like this massive cooperative building project.
Right.
These enormous colonies that grow over centuries.
It's like a city under the sea.
It is. I mean, the Great Barrier Reef, this vast living structure, you
Yeah.
can even see it from space.
Yeah. It's amazing.
But now we're facing this possibility that coral reefs could actually disappear entirely,
That's right.
like become ecologically extinct.
Yeah.
And they could be the first major ecosystem to go in the modern era.
It's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. Some of the predictions are pretty dire, talking about severe decline by 2050.
Yeah. Definitely cause for concern.
It's hard to even imagine.
Right.
I was reading about this big experiment that was supposed to happen at Heron Island.
Oh.
This huge, controlled outdoor environment, what they call a mesocosm.
Right.
And the idea was to directly manipulate CO2 levels on a section of the reef
Wow.
to see the effects. But it got delayed, and the focus shifted to a similar experiment already going on at One Tree Island,
Right.
led by this guy, Ken Caldera.
Ken Caldera, he's a key figure in all this.
Yeah.
He's an atmospheric scientist and the one who actually coined the term ocean acidification.
Wow. So he named it.
He did. What's really interesting is that he started out studying the effects of injecting carbon dioxide into the deep ocean as a way to mitigate climate change. But his calculations showed that even regular atmospheric CO2 emissions were going to lower the pH of the oceans to a really alarming degree.
Wow.
So that became the focus of his groundbreaking 2003 research.
Really?
He even predicted that we could see more ocean acidification in the coming centuries than in the past 300 million years.
Wow, that puts it in perspective.
Yeah, that is a huge change.
So he shifted gears from, trying to store CO2 in the ocean to basically sounding the alarm about what we're doing to it.
Exactly.
And his work at One Tree Island at this site called DK13, it's like taking these global predictions and making them very concrete.
Right, bringing it down to the level of the reef.
Right.
So what are they actually doing there?
Well, they have this whole routine tied to the low tides.
Uh-huh.
They go out and collect water samples
Okay.
to monitor how the reef's ability to build its skeleton, its calcification rate, is changing.
Right.
But it's not just a simple stroll on the beach to get these samples. They have to do this mile-long walk across what they call the algal highway, which is basically this slippery, uneven surface of coral rubble.
Sounds treacherous.
And then they get to this area called the pie crust,
The pie crust.
which is this brittle top layer of the reef flat. And they specifically warn you, don't trust the pie crust.
Oh, wow. So it could give way.
Yeah, exactly. It's risky.
Sounds like it.
And, you read about them encountering all this amazing life while they're making this trek.
Yeah.
Bright blue starfish,
Wow.
leopard sharks in these shallow pools,
Oh, cool.
octopuses camouflaged against the those giant clams with their colorful mantles.
Yeah, it's amazing how much life is there.
It really is. And
Yeah.
then, it's pitch black at night and the stars are just incredible.
Wow.
It's like you're transported back in time to when explorers like Cook were navigating by the stars in this uncharted world.
Yeah, that's a great image.
And it's this stark contrast, right? You
Yeah.
have this vibrant, teeming ecosystem, but it's facing this invisible threat. And what's really fascinating is that some of the earliest clues about this threat came from a completely unexpected place.
Where's that?
Biosphere 2.
Biosphere 2, the artificial ecosystem in Arizona.
Right. The one that, didn't quite work out as a self-sustaining system.
Yeah, they had all sorts of problems.
Oxygen levels plummeting, CO2 levels skyrocketing. But their artificial ocean ended up being this accidental research site.
How so?
Well, the high CO2 in the Biosphere 2 atmosphere dissolved into the water,
Okay.
lowering its pH, and this marine biologist, Chris Langdon, he noticed that the corals were behaving strangely in that environment.
So Biosphere 2's failure kind of led to this unexpected discovery about ocean acidification.
Right. It was a happy accident in a way.
Yeah,
And Langdon's research on that Biosphere 2 ocean was really groundbreaking.
it was.
He got really interested in understanding why those corals were acting so weird.
Uh-huh.
And this led him to focus on this crucial concept.
What's that?
Saturation state with respect to calcium carbonate, specifically aragonite, which is the type of calcium carbonate that corals use to build their skeletons.
Right.
Now, this is a key point.
Yeah.
pH levels tell us how acidic the water is, right?
Yeah.
But the saturation state tells us how easy it is for corals to actually build their skeletons.
Oh, I see.
When CO2 dissolves in seawater, it forms carbonic acid.
Okay.
And that reduces the availability of carbonate ions, which are the building blocks for those skeletons.
Right.
And that lowers the saturation state.
So it's not just about acidity, but about the actual building materials being available.
Right. It's like you could have enough calcium and carbonate in the water, but if the saturation state is low, it's like trying to build a sandcastle when the sand just won't stick together.
Well, that's a good analogy.
It is, right?
Yeah.
And Langdon did this really clever experiment over 3 years.
Uh-huh.
He carefully weighed small coral colonies under different saturation states,
Yep.
and his findings were super clear. There's this direct linear relationship.
Meaning?
The lower the saturation state, the slower the corals grow. Wow.
And below a saturation state of 3, they basically stopped growing altogether.
So there's this threshold where it just becomes too difficult for them to build their skeletons.
Exactly.
Wow.
And when you look at future projections based on current carbon emissions, it's really alarming.
What do they say?
Well, they suggest that by 2100, there might not be any ocean regions left with a saturation state above 3.
That's really bad news for corals.
It is, and it's like Langdon used this analogy of a tree with bugs.
A tree with bugs.
The reef needs to constantly grow just to repair damage from storms and predators and all that.
Uh-huh.
But if growth slows down or stops, the reef basically starts to crumble.
It can't keep up with the natural wear and tear.
Exactly. It's like this slow motion collapse.
So what happened with Langdon's findings? Did people accept them right away?
Well, there was some initial skepticism.
Why is that?
I think partly because of the whole Biosphere 2 association.
Oh, right.
It had this kind of mixed reputation.
But Langdon did more research in controlled lab settings, and his initial findings were confirmed.
Okay.
And importantly, other scientists have replicated his work, and they're seeing the same things.
What sorts of things?
Well, for example, as saturation states decrease, you see a decline in the diversity of coral species, and also in coralline algae, which is like the glue that holds the reef structure together.
Oh.
But interestingly, seagrasses seem to do pretty well in these lower saturation conditions.
Really?
Yeah, which is kind of a silver lining, I guess.
So some species benefit while others suffer.
Right. It's a mixed bag.
And this is all happening against the backdrop of some pretty dire warnings from leading experts.
Exactly like J.E.N. Veron, who's been ringing the alarm bell about coral reefs for decades.
Right.
And then you have recent studies showing a 50% decline in coral cover on the Great Barrier Reef.
50%, that's huge.
In just the last 30 years.
Wow.
And then there's that paper from Ken Caldera's team that concluded that all coral reefs could stop growing and even start dissolving.
Dissolving?
Within the next 50 years.
Oh.
If we don't change our emissions trajectory.
That's a terrifying thought.
It is.
So it's not just about the corals themselves, it's about the entire ecosystem that depends on them.
Right, and that's what's so mind-blowing about coral reefs.
Yeah.
The biodiversity is just off the charts.
It's incredible, often compared to rainforests in terms of the sheer number of species.
Exactly. And, I was reading about how hundreds of different kinds of crustaceans can be found in just a tiny area of the reef.
Yeah.
And the global estimates range from like 500,000 to 9 million species that rely on coral reefs.
That's a huge range.
It is, but it just shows how much we don't know.
Right.
And this leads to what's called Darwin's paradox.
Darwin's paradox, what's that?
It's this question of how can so much life thrive in these tropical waters where reefs are found? Because those waters are actually pretty nutrient poor. And the answer is that reefs are incredibly efficient at recycling nutrients.
Oh, I see.
And the corals themselves are central to that process.
So they're not just providing a habitat, they're actually driving the whole nutrient cycle.
Exactly.
Wow.
And Ken Caldera put it really well. He said, corals build the architecture of the ecosystem. So it's pretty clear if they go, the whole ecosystem goes.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. And there's this great analogy from another scientist, Paul Silverman.
Okay.
He said, if you don't have a building, where are the tenants going to go?
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. So it's not just about losing the corals. It's about losing this entire web of life that depends on them.
And this brings up another point.
What's that?
Coral reefs haven't always existed in their current form.
Right.
If you look at the geological record, you see that reefs have disappeared and reappeared multiple times over millions of years.
Oh, wow. So they've gone extinct before.
They have. And each time they were built by different types of organisms. Yeah, you had these things called rudists and stromatoporoids, and different types of corals like rugose and tabulate corals.
So totally different creatures building reefs in the past.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that after each extinction event, it took a long time for reefs to recover.
Oh, wow. So they're vulnerable to these big environmental shifts.
They are, and it kind of makes you think about what's happening now.
Yeah, it puts things in perspective.
Definitely.
And of course, ocean acidification isn't the only thing threatening coral reefs.
Right, there's a whole bunch of other factors.
Overfishing, pollution from agricultural runoff and deforestation.
Right.
Destructive fishing practices like dynamite fishing, coral diseases.
It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
It is. And then, of course, there's climate change and the warming of the oceans, which is often called the equally evil twin of ocean acidification.
Right.
Because it's causing coral bleaching.
Right, which is basically when the corals get stressed out by high temperatures and they expel the algae that live inside them.
Right. These tiny algae called zooxanthellae.
Yeah.
And those algae provide the corals with food through photosynthesis.
Right, so it's like their solar panels.
Exactly. And without them, the corals turn white and they basically start starving.
And they can die if it goes on too long.
Right.
And these bleaching events are becoming more and more frequent and intense. sense.
They are, and studies are showing that a significant portion of reef-building coral species are now at high risk of extinction due to warming waters.
It's really scary.
It is. And, it's interesting to think about One Tree Island again
Uh-huh.
because it's like this microcosm of the global reef system.
Right.
And back in the 1970s, they did these really detailed biological surveys there,
Okay.
which now give us this valuable baseline to compare to.
Right.
So we can see how much things have changed.
That's really important data.
It is. And even little details like the station manager, Graham, collecting all the plastic debris that washes up on shore.
Oh, wow.
It just highlights how widespread the human impact is.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And then you have all this amazing natural beauty, the abundance of bird life, the constant cycle of predation. It's all happening right there.
Right.
But then you read about things like that near miss during the nighttime trip to the DK-13 site.
What happened?
Well, they were with this coral reef expert, Terry Hughes,
Oh, wow.
and they got lost in chest-deep water in the dark.
Oh, no, that's scary.
It was, and it really underscores the remoteness of this place and the potential dangers.
Yeah.
But they eventually made it back and collected their samples under this incredible star-filled sky.
Wow, so it's like this mix of beauty and danger.
It is.
And it sounds like these researchers are really dedicated to their work.
They are. I mean, they're risking their necks to understand what's happening to coral reefs.
Yeah, because they know how important it is.
Exactly.
And there's another really fascinating aspect to all this. The annual mass coral spawning.
Oh, yeah.
This incredible synchronized reproductive event that's timed with the lunar calendar. And while corals can reproduce asexually, basically cloning themselves.
Right, through budding.
Yeah.
They also have this yearly spawning event, which is crucial for their long-term health.
Why is that?
Because it's how they mix their genes
Oh, I see.
and create more genetic diversity and resilience within the population.
So it's like a big genetic shuffle.
Exactly. And most of the corals that participate in this event are actually hermaphrodites.
Hermaphrodites meaning?
They produce both eggs and sperm.
Oh, wow. So they can fertilize themselves.
Right. And research at Heron Island using a specific coral species, Acropora millepora, has provided all these insights into how ocean acidification is affecting the spawning process.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine being there during the spawning event?
It must be amazing.
It's like a nocturnal underwater snowstorm. But instead of snow, it's these tiny pink egg sperm bundles floating up to the surface.
Wow, that's a beautiful image.
It is.
Yeah.
But then you have these scientists like Selena Ward who's doing these experiments where she exposes these bundles to different levels of ocean acidification. And what she's found is pretty sobering.
What's that?
It has a significant negative impact on fertilization rates, larval development,
right,
and the ability of those larvae to settle and grow.
So it's just disrupting the whole reproductive cycle.
Exactly.
Wow.
And she predicts that if we don't drastically change our carbon emissions, we'll be left with just remnant patches of corals.
Remnant patches. That's a pretty bleak picture.
It is. And, they describe these iridescent worms coming out to feed on the egg bundles.
Wow.
And this mauve-colored slick forming on the surface of the water.
Oh, wow.
It's this mix of beauty and unsettling reality.
Right. Knowing that those newly formed coral larvae are facing an uphill battle in an increasingly acidic ocean.
Yeah, exactly.
So where does all this leave us?
Well, I think the takeaway is pretty clear. The scientific evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Coral reefs are in serious trouble.
Yeah.
And the main culprits are ocean acidification and warming temperatures.
Right.
And the consequences for marine biodiversity could be absolutely catastrophic.
Absolutely.
And we have to remember that this isn't just some abstract environmental issue.
Yeah.
It's based on real observations and data gathered from places like One Tree Island and even Biosphere 2.
Right. It's happening right now.
It is, and it makes you think about the long history of coral reefs.
Yeah.
They've disappeared and reappeared multiple times over millions of years. But what will be the long-term consequences of this current decline that's happening so rapidly because of us?
Right. Will they be able to recover this time?
Will they even have the chance to recover?
Yeah.
And if they don't, what will the oceans look like? What will the planet look like?
Yeah.
I mean, will life find a way to adapt? And what will those new forms of life be?
Will it be a world we even recognize?
Right. It's a question that kind of haunts me,
It does. It makes you think.
It does. It makes you really think about the future.
Yeah. And our role in it.
Exactly. Our role in shaping that future.
That's a good place to leave it, I think.
It is food for thought.
Definitely.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
It's been pretty eye-opening.
It has.
And hopefully for our listeners, too.
I hope so.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into something else that's, keeping us up at night.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Bye.